Hi, Gururaj. It's good to see
Hey,
you.
hey, Allison, how are you doing?
I am good. So let's do this a little bit differently. So you and I first met in what year it was? It was 96 because I turned 21, and we were in the Netherlands
Yes, okay, yes, you're right. It was 96. I met my wife in 1995. So that's the dates. Okay, now,
for what was it? The International Institute of Mediation and Conflict Resolution.
yep, you're right. IIMCR. Yep.
So we were both in college at the time and had chosen to do the summer program. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about what first interested you in studying mediation or conflict resolution.
Yeah, that's a great question, Allison, and I wish I had a better answer for this, but quite honestly, I had found this ad in my school paper while I was in college, and I remember very distinctively I was looking for the crossword in my school paper to do it probably during a class, but I came across the ad for that program, and it just sounded incredibly amazing to be able to get to go to Holland, like you were saying, and study at The Hague for a month. And so I remember going home, looking on the map, and saying, "Oh, where is Holland?" and realizing that's where it was, and saying, "I'm going to give this a shot." And then, as I found out more and more about the program, it really sort of fed into the things I was studying in college as an undergrad. I was studying history and psychology, and looking back, what I've always been really interested in is sort of the relationships amongst people and items and things, and how their past histories affect current day issues. I remember even back in the day, I would think like you need to know what has happened to understand what's going on right now. And so that kind of drew me to that program. I mean, an opportunity to get to go to Europe, meet super cool people like you, but then also it did kind of make sense with the things I was studying at the time. So I felt incredibly fortunate to get in that program. I mean, if you remember, it was amazing. From what I remember, it was like 80 people from around the world, different cultures, different backgrounds, different emphasis of why we're there, and going there and then having all those different speakers speak about different aspects around peace and conflict resolution really what inspired me to kind of move down my path into conflict resolution.
Yeah, it was an inspiring summer. I also remember feeling it was a little bit of a frustrating summer because I was like, well, we were hearing from international diplomats about how to get countries talking to each other. And although I found that fascinating, I didn't ever see myself doing that. And so I'm curious, if you could talk a little bit about after leaving that program, sort of what did you think your career path was going to be, or what was your career path?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and what I do remember, and I remember vaguely what you're talking about, is it was very much like these big time people speaking about state to state conflict and bringing people together or dealing with these giant international problems and really doing that. And I remember that, but one of the speakers I remember even right now, just reflecting with you about that program, is one of the people that really made an impact on me was there was a gentleman, and I can't remember his name, but he was from Northern Ireland, and he spoke about abolishing landmines and the use of warfare. And that is one of those things that I remember being like, wow, that's really cool. Like that's more of what kind of resonated with, and even to this day now when I think about it, that's what more resonates with me about doing things more local on the local level and more in the community and in on the ground. Well, I think it would have been. I mean, I always dreamed it would be really cool to be an ambassador, a diplomat, or whatever those things. I never had those visions of myself that someone would want me to be doing that. So I remember that gentleman specifically, just thinking that's a really powerful dream that he had and really impactful. And then along those lines, and then some of the more the act like we did a lot more activities during that program, and remember engaging with individuals one on one or with groups is that what I had the most fun with. And so those are the things that sort of like what you're asking, sort of reflecting back, kind of thinking about really what sort of pushed me in the on the journey that I've been on, I guess.
Well, so when did you decide to? I mean, well, first of all, what are you share with everybody sort of what you're doing today?
Sure.
However many years later.
Yeah. I know we both look so young that who would ever know that was 1996. But
That's right. That's right.
um, What I do now is I'm an independent consultant. I live in Chicago. I've lived in Chicago for about 4 years. And when I moved to Chicago, I began working on my own. And I'd like to think I work in the three areas of conflict resolution, organizational development, and leadership development. So working on conflict and those who are in conflict. A lot of my work revolves around in that organizational space as well. That's kind of bleeds into that. And then the last thing is leadership development, really looking at training and coaching and helping leaders be more effective in wherever they are.
So that's where you are today. We first met in 1997, 1995, whatever it was, a long time ago when we were even younger. And you have been on this path. Sort of, what has the path been like for you, and what advice did you get from others as you were pursuing this career?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I get that. I do some teaching as well, and a lot of students always ask me like, what should I do, and what's the best piece of advice that you've ever gotten? And for me, my path really started with this program when we met at The Hague, and then I was a junior. I just finished my junior year. So I had one more year at college and went to college, and then I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, so I ended up taking a year off. And then during that year, I was trying to, find myself, and I had reflected on that program, and I'd realized I really valued that program and what that was about. So I actually went ahead and got an MA, a Master's in International Peace and Conflict Resolution from American University in D.C. And that really was the spark, was that trip to The Hague. And so when I was there, and that was in the late 90s, before 9/11. So a lot of people, when I would share, oh, this is what I'm studying, they would say, oh, are you thinking about going into teaching? It was a very limited field at the time. But one of the things that I did while I was at graduate school was I realized maybe there wasn't a lot of work in international peace and conflict resolution. In peace or conflict resolution or ADR, it's the type of work that you never get to open up the paper and see the job announcements. So along those lines, I studied organizational development just to sort of say this would be my backup plan. And through talking to some of my professors and so on, I could start to see where the baseline skills of ADR, conflict resolution, are really transferable in a lot of different fields. And then I started to think about, well, I didn't get a lot of great advice because nobody really knew what they were doing. It felt like, but it sounded, what I was trying to do was trying to meet as many people as possible and kind of find out, well, what it is that you do, and is there a way that I could maybe do that? And fortunate enough, well, being in Washington D.C. at the time, D.C. is a hotbed in its own way of conflict resolution. There's a robust mediation community in D.C., along with sort of the international development, international peace, all the think tanks with the government there. So it's a little bit more robust. So I sort of followed the fable that I joke about working in conflict resolution, is that you have to start volunteering someplace. And so starting to volunteer, but it's really about, for me, it was most helpful is to build a network and talk to as many people as possible. I joke that when I was early on, or even now still, sort of developmentally, I'm like an 18-month-old. Like 18-month-olds only know what they see, and if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. And so for me, early on, I only thought about one thing. I wanted to mediate. I wanted to be a mediator because that was the only thing I knew, and so I was chasing that down. But really, honestly, as I've talked to more people and broadened my community, you start to see what other people are doing, and maybe, oh, well, my skill sets slip into that, even though it's not called mediation or conflict resolution. All of my skills kind of fall into that, and so that might make sense for me to try that out now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? Because we do hear a lot, like, go and volunteer and network and meet people. But what I'm hearing you say is it's really through networking that you expanded your definition of what it meant to be involved in conflict resolution. And just even in your description of what you do today, you're really looking at ways to be involved in 3 different areas, even though it's using some of the same skill sets.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it, and I think it's sort of, at least I can only speak for myself, is I've realized, at least for myself, and what I tell other people too, is try to figure out what are your passions, like what are you really interested in doing, and seeing, and it may not be called mediation, it could be anything, but then how do your skills that you have fall into your passion. I learned early on I really love to do training. And so I was like, oh, well, training, could I do training in conflict resolution? Or could I do, maybe I may not get to mediate, but I could train others on how to mediate. And I know that's a path that you kind of followed as well. Or thinking about my graduate studies, recognize that I think many of us spend more time at work than we do with our own families. And so looking at how do we help support those who work in organizations to have a better place to work. And so are there areas that I can slip my skills in within that? And I think that's the challenge of our field is we have our field is sort of broken into these narrow chunks: mediation, dialogue, whatever that is, ADR. But then sometimes, at least I know for me early on, I failed to kind of look at myself through a skill set lens to see where do my skill sets lend or fall within any of these fields or any field, and kind of chase that rather than chase the one field. Does that make sense?
It does, and it leads me to ask, I guess, one last question, which is if you could just talk about your level of satisfaction and happiness with your current career trajectory or position.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that helped me kind of get to this point is I went to a great mediation training. It was an EEO mediation training. It was only a day, but I had done my fair share of mediation at that point, and I was learning just specifically about EEO. And the trainer had said, someone was asking him, how do you define success in mediation? And what he said was, well, the way that I define success is, have I helped the people who are involved in this conflict have conversations that they've never had before? And that's something that has struck with me, and then that sort of has helped me, like when you're thinking about satisfaction, to say, how do I find satisfaction in the work that I'm doing now? Am I supporting those people to better support themselves? I mean, I think that's sort of the fundamental piece that all of us who work in this field to say, we like to believe that those that we're working with really do have the answer, and we're just there to really help support them, to guide them how they find that answer, whatever shape or way that is. And so that's what's really helped me. It's helped me kind of slip and slide into these different areas. I think for me, a big growing piece was to realize when you work in conflict resolution, you're not there to have the answer. You're there to support those to find that answer. And that's really made a huge difference within me, and it's helped me find satisfaction in the opportunities that I've really gotten to get.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a wonderful message when we reflect on first meeting almost 20 years ago to see where we're at now. And when we reconnected 5 years ago, it was just a highlight. I just remember being like, wait a second, I am CR. It was so cool.
I know. Thanks, Allison. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's, and I know when we both reflected that opportunity to be there 20 years ago really did make an impact. And thinking about this, and when I talk to students or younger people who are thinking about getting in the field, is if you can make those impacts early, you can really shape not only an individual's journey, but I think many of us, that's what we want to do in conflict resolution, is sort of make the impact early so that people can move on and they'll be able to work through their own conflicts. But Allison, this has just been a real joy and a real honor to be part of this. I think what you're doing is really fantastic, and I really believe this is going to make a big impact in the field itself. So congratulations to you.
Thanks so much, Gururaj. I just really appreciate you sharing the story. I mean, I think it's important for everyone to hear that there are folks like you who've been doing this for 20 years and who have really stayed that path, to follow that dream. It's something that you enjoyed, you caught the bug, and you went for it. So thank you for sharing your story and talking with me.
Hey, thanks, Allison.
All right.